Hi, and welcome to another episode of the Thoughtful Talent Show. I'm Jen Werner from Jen Werner Coaching.
And I'm Chad Ahern from Talent and Teams Consulting. And today we actually have two returning guests, and I have the pleasure of introducing the first one. Damian Zikakis is a fellow ICF and Gallup and fellow Eat to Grow certified coach who offers strengths training for teams as well as executive and career coaching for individuals. Regular listeners may recognize Damian from our learner episode, and he was also on with our same guest today for the Relator episode. So we'd like to welcome you back, Damian.
Welcome back, Damian.
Thank you.
If you've been here for our individualization or Relator episodes, you may recognize Michael Stafford. Michael is coming to us from Wexford, Ireland. We met virtually through Eat to Grow at the height of COVID back in 2020 and made a strong connection. With a deep background in HR, his work is centered around people development. So supporting individuals, teams, and organizations to be, as he puts it, future fit. So he's the owner of the Chapter Coach Training and Consultancy Services. He's a senior coaching panel partner at Futureneers and is working towards his professional coach certification with the International Coaching Federation. And personally, someone I consider a loving encourager. Welcome, Michael.
Thank you, Jen. You've just warmed my heart.
Oh, great. So today, I'm so excited because we've invited our guests back here to talk to us about the CliftonStrengths talent theme of input. So gentlemen, before we get started, I want to see where this falls for you within your top 5. Damian?
For me, it's number 3.
Great. And Michael?
Number 2.
Woohoo! Number 2 and 3. This is great. So we have some experts here in the input, at least in themselves, and then also other people that they've coached. So Chad, can you share with us Gallup's definition for input?
Sure. So Gallup defines this input talent theme as such. People exceptionally talented in the input theme have a need to collect and archive. They may accumulate information, ideas, artifacts, or even relationships. So with that definition as our baseline, I'm going to start with our usual question, and these two being pros at this show know that this is coming. How does this theme show up for you personally? And Damian, I'd like to start with you. Just talk to us a little bit about, how you see it showing up. How does it manifest? Maybe what other people have noticed about you when you are utilizing this theme. Just talk to us about everyday life with this theme and living with it.
Okay. So for me, input shows up as I love to collect all sorts of things. Not collect in the same, not collect like a coin collection, although I had one of those as a child, but collecting information and collecting things that, for me, part of it is things that will be useful either now or in the future. So it could be a topic that I'm studying, could be items, physical items that I've always been a do-it-yourselfer. So something that I either acquire or find that I think will be useful, that, it could be visible to others as they might see me picking something out of a recycling bin somewhere, not my own. Or it could be visible as they might see me wandering the aisles of a hardware store or a bookstore, or observing that I'm spending perhaps to them an inordinate amount of time researching something. Give me a particular topic, resume tips, and I could spend hours online or pre-online, in a library researching that and collecting this information that will be useful either now or in the future.
Okay. Michael? come to you before we open this up. I know that there are some ideas that we covered in our pre-show that I want to make sure we touch on, but I want to hear from you first about how this shows up for you.
Very similar to what Damien has said. When we spoke about this yesterday, I was reflecting and I was like, you know what? If I think of one of the biggest ways in which it shows up, it's just my husband would refer to me as a hoarder. So everything is here. It's here, and it's here or somewhere that I know it can be gotten, and it may not be valuable, but at the time I would have said this could be valuable in the future. So there's a real sense of the information, the resource, the friendships, the gathering of people, the books. It's just about getting them and having them there to lean into, not necessarily putting them all in there, although there is a lot that goes in there as well.
Okay. Both of you spoke to us yesterday a little bit about some talent combinations that really play into your input. And I'm just wondering, particularly Michael, you had started yesterday with a series of 2 or 3 different themes that really drive your input or what makes you go get things. Could you talk to us a little bit about those themes and sort of their impact or their play on each other?
Absolutely. Individualization and input for me is a really, really superpower when it comes to building relationships and really seeing another person. So that's individualization and really seeing them. But the input comes in where could be on holidays, random place, and I would see a fridge magnet from this particular area. And I would know that my friend, for example, never has been to this country, but a wish of hers would be that she wants to go there. And I will pick up that fridge magnet from that area for her, knowing that that's where she would love to go, but maybe can't go for whatever reason, and gift it to her in that perspective. So it's the input of collecting. And also I just collect some things that I'll go, I don't know, it could relate to somebody, maybe. Like I think I shared with you before, but I bought my mom's birthday card for next year already because it was a card and I was like, from an input perspective, that looks really well, it reads really well. It has a particular saying on the card that I know my mom really appreciates. So there's that. And then the second one I would share with you would be maximizer because it's my number one. I say that as I exhale. Sometimes it's my number one. And but with input and maximizer and going from good to great, input really serves that because it's all about, is there some other nugget there? Is there something else that's going to help shift the dial for people? So that's not just one person, but it's impacting on a community or a bigger impact.
Okay.
Really good.
Awesome. Damian, I'm going to come back to you with the same question. What theme really plays into your input? Maybe helps drive one way or the other.
Yeah. So for me, it's the theme above and below. So learner is number 2, input number 3, connectedness number 4. And I think the learner input combination is probably for strengths coaches probably fairly obvious. I love to learn, and then I love to archive what I've learned. And so sometimes the learner drives the input, and I'm on a quest for more and more and more and more about whatever the topic is, going way above and beyond what I need. But I just love the learning part. And it could be everything from figuring out how to work with electricity and do wiring in my own house that's way beyond what a typical do-it-yourselfer would do. Like for my electric car charger, 240 volt outlet, like no big deal, as long as you learn, right? And so, so sometimes learner drives input, sometimes input drives learner. I start collecting stuff and then I realize I actually want to learn more about it. based on what I've
Interesting.
uncovered. And then the connectedness didn't really occur to me until our conversation yesterday that I think sometimes when I see something, I may not have a future use for it, but I immediately think of someone else. And Michael, you just mentioned the same thing, thinking about your friend. And maybe that comes from your relator as well. But for me, I see connections between disparate things that I think, oh, if I combine these two things together, that will be really valuable either to me or to someone else.
Yeah.
And of course, I have relator as my number one, but I don't know that relator is directly driving input as much as the connectedness and how things might fit together.
Yeah. I remember you talking a little bit yesterday, and this may be a topic you want to bring up later in the show, but you talked about how things don't necessarily have to be right with you, but you might, find something or have something that you then give to, I think it was your son who's trying to repair something. So you had all these tools and seeing the connection, like, oh, this thing I've gathered via my input is now valuable to somebody else, seeing the connection between the thing you've collected and the person that can use it. That's really interesting to hear you highlight that.
Yeah, and that the word hoarder, I don't like the pejorative nature of that word, but I'll choose the word collector or archivist.
Yeah.
But I have stuff that I have absolutely no need for personally, and I know it will be useful to my son with his old house that he's constantly having to do something on, or to to a neighbor or a friend or somebody I haven't yet met that this will be of use to somebody. So I don't want to get rid of it. Yeah. And of course that creates sometimes challenges of space or sometimes relationship challenges. Like, do we really need to say that? Well, it's not taking up much space, and I know right where it is, and it'll be useful to someone else in the future.
That's a great point that you said, that right where it is. So Michael touched on that too, that when he was sharing with us that he might have some hoarder tendencies here, that he knows right where it is. So let's talk about that a little bit. Like, what about this archiving process? So do you both archive, and is that something that you can say, like, I have that and I know right where it is? Is that, share with us, Damian?
So for me, I guess I like to think that I know right where it is. But I know generally where it is. And a perfect example is, I don't know if you ever saw a space pen. It's something that came out back in the 80s or something like that. And the novelty behind it is it writes underwater and it writes upside down, and was developed for NASA. Well, I managed to get 2 of them back in the 80s, and then I got some refills, and one of them ran out of ink 40 years later. I didn't know right where it is, but I knew generally where it was, and I found the refill last week, and it still works.
Oh my goodness.
Wow.
What did you say, 40-year-old pen, and you've still found the ink that works with it? That's
crazy.
Fantastic.
Oh, love it. Michael, what about you and your archiving?
Yeah, Damien, it's really strange when you mention that, because I'm like, yeah, it's definitely somewhere, but I may not be able to locate it straight away, but it's definitely somewhere, whatever it is that I'm looking for. And I think I may have shared this with you yesterday, but I would have about I think it's 4,227 voice notes to myself.
To yourself.
To myself. So basically recordings of me walking down the street or on the beach, and I'll think of something or I'll see something and I'll be like, I really want to know more about that. Remind myself to do it, because that's my archive place.
Okay.
Because believe it or not, although I would like to think it is all in there somewhere, again, I like to be able to get to it quickly. So yeah, it's kind of it's that archive system. It's somewhere, but I don't always have that exact spot where I would file it, in that regard. And maybe that's because, most of the executing teams are not in my top 10, so there's nowhere where they're going to be.
Touche.
I am curious a little bit about that, especially for somebody listening to this episode. Maybe they've just, learned their CliftonStrengths, they've got input. Are there particular platforms or systems that you have used with some success? I mean, Michael's mentioned voice recordings to himself have been great. Damian, I think you mentioned a couple ways that you try and organize yourself and all the knowledge that you pick up. You've definitely leaned a little bit more, not so much on the relationships like Michael has, but wanting to have things organized, a lot of different knowledge in different places. Can you talk to us about some systems that maybe have worked for you that might also work for somebody that's new to their input theme or is trying to figure out how to not perfect it, but enhance it?
Yeah, optimize it. Yeah, for me, for digital content, stuff I find online, or even scan or take a photograph of, I use a program called Evernote,
Okay.
a cloud-based program called Evernote. But I also use the Notes app on my phone if it's just going to be something short. And both of those are searchable, and both of those are good repositories for all things digital.
Nice.
And I just started using a feature that Evernote's had for a long time of linking one note to another. So about a year and a half ago, I changed my diet to mostly plant-based. And so I do a lot of research of recipes and I save them in Evernote. Well, now I've got one note that is our favorite recipes, and it's got links to the other recipes that are in
Nice.
there. And the other one that was, I just figured out about about 3 years ago now, was as a coach, I take a lot of notes, and I use a note-taking app, and I use an Apple Pencil. And so I write the notes longhand because I can do that and still, basically maintain contact with the camera. But it digitizes those notes, so I can search for words or names.
Nice.
And I have records of every coaching call I've had since 2019.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
I hope you're backing that information up.
The cloud.
the cloud. Michael, were there any systems you want to add to Damian's list? I didn't want to leave you out of that conversation, but
see, I look at it a little bit differently in the sense that when I think of systems that help me with my input, I would think of an app called Blinkist, Blinkist, and it's a platform that summarizes books basically. So inputs well, we talked about this. We love to read, but sometimes we just love to collect books and know they're there. It depends really on where you are on that on that side of things. But what Blinkist allows me to do is get a really, not even a top level, kind of just a deeper level of a book in 1 or 2 pages that I can go, is that useful for me in the future? And do I need to read more of that book? Or is that enough information for me to be able to use that information going forward? So I find it helps. And in a raw state, when I wouldn't have even worked on input before or noticed it very much, I would have just bought the book. Now I'm like, how can I be the most efficient with this input? And where's this information going? I'm putting it, filing it away, but knowing it's available.
Oh, so good. I love that we're having this conversation about using the technology, because both of you said that your friends have a term for you, or Michael, you specifically said your friends call you something, and I would like you to share that with us.
Well, they call me a lot of things, but I'll share I'll share with you what
In
we
this
were
context,
referring
please.
to in the context of input. So it will be, oh, ask Michael or Mr. Google.
There it is.
So, because and I have this joke with a lot of people because they'll ask me something and I'll be like, I didn't know I worked for tax affairs. I didn't know I worked for the government. I didn't know I worked for the hospital. I didn't know whether or not the parking fines in an area had increased. but everyone will ask me. And the challenge is sometimes I will actually know the answer because, as Damien says, we pick up this information as we're going along, and do we use it? We may use it in the future. So they'll come and ask. So that's definitely something that, from a boundary perspective as well, I have to be very careful with, because I could easily get absorbed into that useless part of
Mm.
telling someone about the parking fines that have been introduced in Ireland and that they're increasing, when in fact that person doesn't even have a car. It's not relevant to them. But yeah.
Damien, do you have similar experiences with
Yeah,
your
so
gathering?
for me, I know we're going to be talking about the downside, but for me, it can be a compulsion. So somebody will mention something like, "Have you heard the parking fines are changing?" And I have to go look it up. I
Oh,
want to know, even if I don't have a car,
that's crazy.
which I do.
Yeah.
But something like that, where it's like, I wonder about that. And so I know a little bit about almost everything, to the point where my wife will ask me a question and I'll give her an answer. And sometimes she'll say, "Do you actually know that? Or are you making that up?" And I'll say, "No, I actually do know that, because I know so much about so many things. I can oftentimes infer what the answer is going to be. And I'm usually pretty right. But sometimes, she'll call BS on that.
Well, I think this is a great segue into understanding that both our themes work in both good ways and bad ways. And so sometimes they can be extremely helpful. And sometimes, as Michael and Damian have suggested, they can get in our way and maybe start to go a little on the dark side. So I want to talk about that side first. So, Michael, I want to start with you. And I'd like you to share with us like some ways that this theme may have negatively impacted your life or work, maybe in the past when it was a little more immature or raw, and then now, how you might like work on some of those things
Yeah.
to keep it in check.
And I think before I get into it, I think what keeps it in check is leaning into another one of your talents, and saying, okay, that's the one that's going to help me out here. So you used the term dark side, and I immediately was in my rabbit hole gathering information. And it can be a very happy dark place, but in terms of getting stuff done, not so good.
Okay.
So that for me is definitely where I need to be mindful, and also work with people who know that about me and can safely say, Michael, come out of the rabbit hole. You have enough information.
Oh, good.
Okay.
Really good.
That
Yeah.
sounds like a
Yeah.
really useful. That sounds like a really useful phrase of when's enough enough.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Never.
never, never. Okay,
Never
I
to
didn't
an
say it was
That
going to
would be
input.
get
your
you out of
maximizer
this.
talking.
What's that?
That's
That would be his
maximizer talking,
maximizer
Damien.
Right,
talking.
right. No, I got that part. I just I was thinking about somebody trying to help you, or thinking about you know being that partner that can help you
Mhm.
come out of that negative place. That's a great phrase. So that I know we're going to talk about the impact of this theme in the sort of the team context and how that integrates. But just thinking about other listeners that might have somebody that has input talents, in the next cubicle or the next office, on their next Zoom call, be able to bring that phrase up and at least get you to think about like, hey, do I have enough? That's helpful.
Yeah, Damien, for you, what are some ways that this has worked against you in instead of helpful?
Yeah, so I would say the same, very similar to what Michael's mentioned, which is, so when we think about the word collecting, when are there enough in the collection? And it can be all sorts of things. It can be, for me, it can be articles of clothing, or pots and pans. Like I see a pan, oh, I really love to have this. And it's not the acquisition. It's like, this will be the perfect pan. And then my wife will say, yeah, but we cook that once a year. So we need the perfect pan, or can the pan we've had the last 10 years continue to work just fine? I don't need to add to my collection of that. And so I've seen it, on the work side come back to be a challenge for me when will either go down that rabbit hole of collecting information. I will, when I was leading the career office, I wanted to see how other schools, what resume formats other schools were using one time. And so I got 3 or 4, and I shared that with the person on my team that was overseeing this project, but I had volunteered to go do the research. And I said, I've got 3 or 4, but I really want to get 3 or 4 more. She was like, we've got enough. We don't need 3 or 4 more. And so that's hard for me to say, okay, enough's enough.
Damian, there's something you brought up yesterday in our pre-show that we haven't touched on yet, and I thought was really insightful, and it was not something I would normally associate with somebody with input. A desire to be right. Could you talk a little bit about that? That you've hinted your wife sometimes calls BS on certain things. But there was sort of a whole other branch of that conversation that I think could be really useful to our listeners in terms of interacting with those or even understanding their own input talents, but also particularly when they're interacting with somebody that has input talents. Could you elaborate?
Well, yeah, happy to. And so I would say I've seen this more, this side appear more in my personal life than in my professional life, but a little bit in my professional life too, now that I think about that, which is, as I mentioned, I know a little bit about a lot of things, and in some areas I tend to go deeper, and so I know a lot about a particular thing, and so when that topic comes up and I say, this is the answer, these are the facts, and someone says, I don't think that's the case. Again, this sort of compulsion kicks in where I'm pretty sure I'm right. And so for me, I mean, I did this as recently as yesterday across the dinner table. I pulled out my phone and I said, no, here it is. Like, I'm not making this up. This is what the facts are. And I realized that that's not an attractive personality trait of always needing to be right. And so that's something that I'm working on. Because
Michael,
sometimes it just doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Sure.
Michael, you had your own version of this when we were talking yesterday. This is why I'm bringing it up, because I thought it came out interestingly in both of you. So the drive to be right, but then also, Michael, you mentioned something happens when people start to question you, or you find a fact is wrong.
As in their fact is wrong, or the fact that I said is wrong? Because more than likely their fact is going to be wrong if they're coming up against an input.
I think that the thread that I was hoping you'd pull out a little bit is when you have said something and then found out that you were
Wrong.
off a little bit. Can you talk just a little bit about how that can run amok or be
really
disadvantageous?
Really
you don't have to if you don't want to.
No. I'm only kidding, of course, because it's important. It's a real. You can almost convince yourself that the need to be right is stronger than being. The need to show that can be stronger than actually sometimes knowing. So I have read it before. I've definitely seen it before. I'm unsure whether it's number 11 or number 9, for example. But I'll convince everyone else it's number 11. Yeah? And then it's number 9. And I'll go, oh, I was wrong. And then where that will actually send me is to a place where almost where you beat yourself up because of the need to be right and to show that you are right. I would start to get in my head and go, if that's wrong, you possibly need to go back and study that entire book again just to make sure you're right the
Wow.
next time. Now I've got learner number 10, so it's not as high for me as Damien. So I have to really watch that in terms of the need to be right in the need to be right in that sense. Because I find as a person with high input, the expectation with a lot of people is that you are right and they believe you. Now I know that leans in with other talents as well, but
Right.
because most of what you say is right, I will not focus on the most of what was right if I get it wrong. I'll focus on what I got wrong and beat myself up about it.
Hmm.
And that's why it's so important that we lean on those other talents to pull us
Yeah.
back out of those holes.
Right.
Because, you know, Chad and I, with our deliberative, had a very similar conversation when we were talking about that. Once you start down that rabbit hole, and if you find that you've made a mistake, it makes it that much harder to step out and do
Yeah.
something different or new, you know. So, and I could see that with you. It makes it that much harder for someone with input to stop gathering information on something just because they found out that they were wrong in this one instance. So
Yeah.
thank you so much for sharing. I think it's really important that our listeners and viewers get to see this stuff, because it's not always the stuff that everybody talks about, but it's the real life situation.
Yeah.
Chad, did you have something you wanted to add?
No, I was really fascinated by that thread in our conversation yesterday, because that was not a behavior attribute I would have necessarily associated with input, but I can associate with it given my own learner talents. We've talked about on the show before. My learner is my number one. It's a major driver in my life. But just hearing that drive to be right, or shaking the confidence when you all of a sudden find a fact is wrong, and the negative impact, the darker places it can push you to, lack of confidence, or feeling like you've got to go back and reread an entire book or encyclopedia or whatever it is, go back and re-listen to an entire podcast just to find that key phrase that you thought you knew, was just really fascinating to me in reflecting on our the pre-show conversation we had yesterday. So thank you very much for both of you being vulnerable with that. I know Jen wants to take us to a more positive place, so I'm gonna let her take that question next, and maybe we can bring this back up to a little bit more of a lively environment.
Right. Yes, absolutely. So what I heard both of you say throughout your explanations of how it shows up for you personally, and then also in some of the, even though it comes out of maybe a dark side, what I'm hearing is your input is looking for the usefulness. So let's talk about the positive sides of this and how this has really impacted your life, benefited your work, relationships. Damian, let's start with you.
So I guess the positive side is I enjoy being a resource to others, whether it's a bit of knowledge or a suggestion for a book or an article or a physical item. All those tools that I have that I'm happy to loan out. And so those that get to know me know that I can be a good starting point, Mr. Google, as it were, a good starting point when they have a question about something, because I may know a little bit about it and enough to help them not have to do that initial research, but actually point them in a direction that's useful and save them time. And so that's one way I would say that I can think of, both in my professional life and my personal life, that's come out. And as a coach, that's helpful. And it's not just facts or books or something. Sometimes it's people. Like, I know a guy or I know a person that I think that could help you more than I can about this particular thing. And I think that can be really a time saver. when I know somebody. And again, that's, I think, my connectedness also coming into play
Yeah.
with the input.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
I keep
great.
hearing that from you, Damian. Every time you talk about the connections you're trying to make, or put piece A with person B, man, what connectedness there. And it's fascinating to keep hearing it.
Yeah, absolutely. Michael, what about you? What are the wonderful ways this is working for you?
I thought of this yesterday and I was like, damn, I could have said that yesterday on the record or on the pre-record, but it's the perfect opportunity. So just to kind of summarize it, and I think it's William Shakespeare that said this, but it's an old saying that says, Jack of all trades, master of none. Okay.
Oh, mhm.
But the saying is actually more than that. And I think it encapsulates how input can be so valuable in a team or, in your own personal life. Because he goes on to say it's a jack of all trades, master of none, though often it's better than master of one. So what he's really saying is it always right to just be a specialist in one area, when in fact a jack of all trades can do many different things because they've a lot of knowledge, like Damien sharing about his electronic charger and the fact
Mhm.
that he's not a qualified electrician, but he may in fact give that a go. But again, it's a really powerful way, and I think that quote's often misinterpreted in that regard. And I think it does summarize what input does. But
Mhm.
getting back to your question, I think it shows up really well. For me, connectedness is number 7, Damien. So I hear
Mm.
when you're talking, I get all of that. But for me, it's more so around the research. It's not necessarily the connecting of people, which is
Mm.
strange because 5 of my relationship building domains are in my top 10. But again, you play to your strengths.
Yeah.
And it's that I know I've read a quote somewhere, like a particular example today. I got sent from a colleague the German engagement index from Gallup. Okay. And we usually see a lot of US engagement surveys from Gallup,
Right.
Mhm.
you know, and that hurts input because I'm like, what can we do with
Right.
that over here? This side of the pond, as they say.
Right.
And straight away I was like, but I know there is another report about European engagement, and it is Gallup, and I think it's from 21. So I knew enough
Mhm.
Yeah.
to then Google that, and then the report came straight up. So it was like, it's there somewhere. Let me go find it. 2 seconds. And I think that really adds value in when you're working with people if they need quick answers or quick decisions and inputs in the team. It's that I've read it, I've seen it somewhere, I'll get it for you. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, that's where I think it really helped.
Yeah, and Damien, you shared with us yesterday in the pre-show about that compulsion or ability to pull that information, and then you both of you had that kind of like, I know I have it, but let me get you some more. Or can you share a little bit more about that?
Yeah. So this kind of goes back to, we were talking about, organizing. I know I have it. I'm not exactly sure where it is, but I know I can find it. Um, and an image that came up when we were talking about that topic was from the movie Raiders of the Lost Ark, where they stored the Ark of the Covenant in the warehouse.
Oh, there's a good one.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes I feel like my input is that warehouse. Like, I know I've got an article on keywords to use or keywords to not use in a resume. I don't want to take time to look for it while we're on this call, so I'll find it and I'll send it to you later.
Yeah.
You have to go to the back wall of the massive warehouse, right?
Yes.
You got to go find it, then bring it to the front.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love seeing how both of you, it sounds like you're using it for yourself. Like that it might be information or things and stuff that I might need later, but you also, both of you, I'm hearing, have this others focus also. Like, so it's not just about what you need, but someone else might need it. You might not even know them yet. And that was one of the things I loved about what you said earlier, Damian, that you don't even know who might need this yet, but someone might need it.
Indeed. No, we often hear the phrase people pleaser in a negative way, but for me, it's a very positive and it's inspiring. And it's I was led through an exercise years ago at a conference about coming up with a, if you had to have like a medieval saying, like Michael the collector. Well, mine, what I came up with after being guided through this exercise was Damian the helpful.
Oh, nice.
Oh,
So I know
love
all
that.
that stuff will be helpful to somebody who I may not have met yet.
This has been really informative in terms of thinking about, how it has played out for each of you. I'm wondering if maybe, we're starting to talk about others, being helpful to others, sharing information with others. I want to take this opportunity to switch the lens a little bit on the conversation, which is, all four of us are coaches. We, have coached people with, some of us have coached people with input. You two probably do a better job of that than myself or maybe Jen. But I'm curious if you could talk to any facets around the input talent theme that are a little different than how we've already started to describe it, or unique ways it's come out in some of the clients you've coached, or maybe colleagues that you've worked with that have shared the input talent theme. And Michael, I'm going to start with you this time.
Okay, my input is going. Which example will I choose? So I'm going to go with a couple, and I'm just to give this a caveat. Input when you're coaching. So as a coach with high input, I have to be mindful of that when coaching because it can affect my coaching presence. Because straight away I'm going into not seeing the person, but the solution or possible resource that they may need to fix this issue.
Oh, wow.
So really managing that and staying silent and a coach supervisor I work with is really helping to really bring this to life for me and say, when you're there sitting with the client, is the spotlight on you or them? And I love that analogy because if I'm in my head thinking about how they need to read this book or this, then I'm not with them. So
Right.
that's really powerful. And that's a really great analogy. I use it a lot because it also helps me to converse with people that may be coaching people that have input or they in fact have input themselves. The biggest challenge, and this is just to summarize it, I suppose, what I see with input is the biggest challenge from a point of view of somebody that has it and you're coaching them. If they have low executing, they will always be safe gathering knowledge and never move. So if they're managing a team, they're quite happy to keep gathering and gathering and gathering. And you'll hear them say things like, we're just waiting on one more report to come through from management next week. We're just waiting on John to get back to me from accounts. It's like the need for that knowledge and information can sometimes outweigh the actual getting it done. So you have to be
Got it.
mindful of that. And then, asking questions of that. And then from a, positive, from a spin then with, if it's somebody in a team that's got high input, leaning into them to do that research on a project, leaning into them to ask them about facts and information.
Yeah.
Because isn't this all about fueling us? Put them in their happy place.
Yeah.
Yeah.
but just manage that they don't stay in that rabbit hole analogy.
Okay.
Yeah.
Damian, have you seen input show up differently in people you've coached than what we've already described?
Yeah, as I think about the people I coach, I can't think of anyone for whom input is one of their dominant themes. So I'm coming up empty on this one.
Okay.
But I feel like I just had a coaching session with Michael because he described me in two ways. One, the first one was wanting one more bit of information. In my own head, I had described that oftentimes as being a consensus builder. Get input from everyone before making a decision. I don't have any executing themes in my top 5, and maybe one in my top 10. And then the other way you described me was I have such a breadth of knowledge and resources that I think the spotlight swivels towards me in coaching calls, and I'm waiting for them to finish talking so I can tell them about something that I know. So not being present in the way we're supposed to be present.
Yeah.
And I've become aware of that over the last couple of years, and is also, for me, is something I'm also working on.
Right.
We're always, all of us, a work in progress. So
Right.
I love that you guys are able to see it and share it with us too. Chad, I had an example.
I was just about to ask you, Jen. So
awesome.
jump right in.
With a colleague who had input high and woo and communication, and her thing like was always like the holder of all of the information. People came to her for everything, and she knew it. And if she didn't know it, her words, like what Damian said, were, "I got a guy. Hang on, I got a guy." And she could connect people to anyone else who might have the information that they needed. So it was just a really beautiful way to see her input as she gathered things and then was able to use it to help others. Whoever she met and friends that she didn't know she had yet, she found them and had what they needed to. So.
Yeah. Jen, I just want you to highlight one thing you mentioned in the pre-show around that person. You'd mentioned input with communication, and she didn't originally see the connection between those two. But then it was about building the relationships, and then that's where she got to the "I got a guy." And I thought, I just wanted to bring that up. I didn't know if you want to say anything more about it, but it was something that I really highlighted for myself that I'm going to take away from this session with the three of you.
Oh, sure.
So I didn't know if you wanted to go any deeper on that.
Yeah, it was a weird thing because her report, not the insight report, but the regular CliftonStrengths, like what is input report, told her that she probably collects porcelain dolls. And she was like, "What? No, I don't collect porcelain dolls." And she didn't see any connection to like this input. Like she didn't see it in her life at all. And as we continued to work through some things about her and how she works, she was like, "But I do collect people, I guess." And that was where she connected the dots. She was looking at her communication. She was always talking to people, always learning more things about them. And then it caught her, "Oh, I'm like picking up these little nuggets from every person." And then later I'm able to say like, "Oh, hey, I know a guy who can help you with that." So it was just a really beautiful like aha moment for her, especially because she didn't see herself as a collector at all at first. And then as soon as she saw it, that's all she saw. She can see it everywhere and in every facet of her life, with people, with stuff, with, different things that she didn't think she was collecting, but she definitely had been.
Yeah.
Lovely.
I think that's the point, is sometimes, these two gentlemen obviously are highlighting input at a very high level, but somebody, brand new to it, taking that moment to expand it, to something broader than maybe it's tools or books or, library cards or whatever, but that it can be, just going back to the original short definition of you even collect relationships. And so I think sometimes that gets lost with this theme. I wanted to just build on a couple things that all three of you have mentioned, because this theme has shown up in two people that I've coached. I've coached a few others with it, but some kind of unique ways that has come up. The first one actually goes to something Michael has shared a little bit about, of focusing on the information, constantly gathering that. But with this individual, he has learner and relator and harmony, which really puts a very sort of practical edge on the information. But there's also I don't want to say ignoring, but a diminishing of the emotional weight of certain pieces of information. So while we're talking about building relationships, this input is very much not about gathering the emotional knowledge or inputs of a situation or a relationship, and focusing very much on the information. So I thought that was an interesting dynamic that somebody with input that's just learning about might want to think about. And then the other one, the other observation I've had is when it comes to input, it seems to travel in the triad with learner, which we've talked about, but also intellection. And with another coaching client I had, this person had all three in their top 5, and she was in a leadership role. So she's like, I do all this thinking, I do all this gathering, but I'm not really out there being sort of the stereotypical leader out in front. And what we came to was the analogy of a Dyson vacuum cleaner. So her learner directed the direction of the vacuum cleaner. The input was the sucking in, taking everything in. And then if you've ever watched a Dyson vacuum cleaner or another canister, the intellection was the spinning around of the material inside the canister, where you separate out sort of the big stuff from the dust. And so I thought that was a really interesting dynamic when it comes to input, is that they're then the ones that are able to pull out, if you say, vacuum up like a kid's Lego, and that's a big nugget that you need to keep, that ability to recognize what that nugget is and then store it, kind of goes along the lines of what Michael and Damian have already talked about. But it was just, it's an interesting dynamic. Those three seem to travel together and worth noting when they do. So,
and they're my 3 strategic thinking in my top 10. So they do.
So see, Michael, example number 1.
There you go.
So,
well, and I love, Chad, that you said that she was able to pull out that information based on using those 3 talents. And you used a specific phrase that she used.
Yes. So once she made this connection that this was her superpower, that she could take in a lot of, at the time it was industry knowledge that she really needed to take in, process through, and then figure out how to share that with her team. Because while she didn't necessarily thrive and strive to be in the limelight, what she realized is that she could distill those pieces of information into what she ended up calling knowledge bombs, so that she encapsulated that, then was able to quickly share that with her team. And a lot of them had the influencing themes. One of them had communication. I think another one had significance. They really wanted to be out in front of people sharing this information. I think there was another person with maximizers, so that, they really wanted to, put on the best presentation. Well, she was equipping them with that information because of her input talents. So just, it goes along the lines of what we've already talked about, but I just thought the dynamic was so valuable that I wanted to share it.
I'm glad you did, because it leads us into this imagery. So a lot of times, every episode, we like to come up with some images that make us think about input, or ways that if you're kind of new at this and you're trying to explain input to someone else, what are some images we might use? Chad, I love the Dyson vacuum. So I think that one's fantastic. You can see all the little nuggets in there and pull the Lego out.
Yeah.
Damian, can you share with us, what are some images you have for your input theme?
Well, I think my new favorite may be that scene from Raiders of the Lost Ark, the whale horse.
I was gonna say, if that did make it on, I was gonna put it back in for the
Gonna
show
add it
notes.
in.
So
But the one that I've thought about a lot, which is kind of tied to my learner and input together, is the video game from the 80s called Pac-Man, which has come out, in different versions since then. But it's, this little creature going along the line, consuming. And so that's me gathering, more and more and more and more.
Yeah, I love that. Thank you so much. Michael, what about for you? What are some images?
Just before I answer that, when you spoke about Pac-Man yesterday, I was in a rabbit hole yesterday afternoon for at least an hour looking at it, looking at previous Atari games and when they were when they came up, and I was like, why? Why? But yeah, so for me,
oh,
I think there's two images to come up. One of them being like a puzzle, so a jigsaw puzzle, because I feel input when used correctly brings together information which can then help, like what Chad said, like that knowledge bomb, that can
yeah.
have that explosive kind of thing. But I also think of a golden nugget, as in a nugget of information. So you're sifting through, the gold rush or whatever, and you find something and you're like, that's what we're going to use. That for me is really, the golden nugget. And it's actually what we refer to in some of our program training as, we're going to give you a nugget of information, which basically means some new learning for the people to process and take something away from. So
Oh, I love the golden nugget one
Yeah.
and the sifting. That's great. So good.
I'm gonna call out one that you brought up in the pre-show that I thought was wonderful, and it has to do with a particular store. I'd love for you to bring that back into this one for our listeners, because I thought that was a gem.
I didn't think I was allowed to mention that store just in case. So I said I'd keep away from naming stores.
No,
But no, it's all
that's a key
cool. It's
one.
cool. Listen, we'll have so many listeners. It's going to benefit the organization at
Right,
the end of the
exactly.
Absolutely.
day.
Free
Yeah.
marketing.
So free marketing. IKEA, the wonderful the wonderful store where everything is in the store, is a real, from a big perspective, I think, of input. It's like every room is different. Every room can look different. Every kitchen can look different. And, I would find myself in my happy place walking around IKEA and just looking at, oh, that's useful. I'm definitely don't know what it's useful for, but I'm going to get it. And it's going to be there in the junk box
And
and adding
Damian,
value.
And for
you have a
me,
store too.
Yeah, I was just gonna say there's a store thread here.
and for me, it's a hardware store, particularly the old-fashioned hardware stores that aren't around. We moved to a smaller city a couple of years ago, and there's one of those old-fashioned. I mean, there's a Home Depot and there's a Lowe's and a Menards, but the old-fashioned stores where you can find a glass measuring cup and you can find a pickaxe and you can find, whatever, a little bit of everything. Like that, that's my happy place.
For me, the one I'm thinking of, Damian, is the Ace Hardware in Hudsonville. Is like that. So if you haven't been there, go.
I've been.
Well,
Yeah.
And for our
awesome.
listeners, this would be a Michigan reference.
Yes. Right.
Jen and Damian come from the wonderful, great state of Michigan.
The other thing I love about old-fashioned hardware stores and the big box to some extent, but not quite as much as the old-fashioned ones, is there's a person in there that knows about that thing.
Yeah.
Like I learned many years ago when I needed to move a sink and I needed to deal with copper plumbing, I went into our local hardware store and said, blah, 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 I needed it. And the guy says, oh, that's so easy. I'm going to teach you how to do it right now. You need this torch. You need this solder. This is how you do it. Da, da, da. I went home and my wife said, you're going to do what? And it worked. Not a leak. Perfect. Love it.
Awesome.
I love the returning thread of I got a guy at the hardware store that just told me how to do this. So I think that's great.
So good. Well, in this case, like now I think it's time to think about the ways that we've used our talents before and how they're beneficial and maybe some ways that we can keep our other team members on track. If they have input, and it might be running amok within a team, whether that's from a team leader perspective or a team member. I'd like you guys to talk to us a little bit about like how input might have some consequences to a team. So you're both looking very
It's
pensive.
Michael's turn.
Yeah, we'll start with Michael. Okay, Michael.
Though he's making
I'm
a face right now.
I'm thinking of it brings me to the Brene Brown Dare to Lead book, and she talks about armored leadership versus daring leadership. And armored leadership is where, now I hope she's listening and I don't unquote this or quote this incorrectly, but it's along the lines of being right as opposed to staying curious and getting it right.
Mm.
And I find sometimes with input they have to be mindful of that. It's like I I'd rather, and Damien, I think you'll probably share this better when you talked about yesterday about the president. I'd rather be president, or my father would rather be president than be right,
Rather
or
be
Right.
the
right
other
than
way.
president.
The other way around.
Yeah, the other way round. So I think we have to be mindful of that, and the impact that could have on a team. For a team member, it's I suppose, getting them, just, it goes back to it because it shows up a lot with input for me in teams when I see it. It's that they're quite comfortable to have their head down working, but are they actually producing?
Ah, that's a good one.
So having someone in the team that can help support them in that way to get them up and go. So, because they'll be really powerful in a team,
Yeah.
but may not look to be productive in a team because they're just giving the information, or they mightn't come above to say, I'll hear some information on that unless they're asked,
Sure.
especially a newer team member.
Oh, really good. Because they would be stuck digging, happy to keep collecting the information and digging, but without someone to
Absolutely.
tell
And
them we've got
yeah,
enough.
and then it gets to the review and they think they're doing a great job because they've been sitting
Yeah.
there digging for 6 months, and the person says, but you haven't told us anything that you've been digging for.
Right.
Okay,
So just
yeah.
making sure that you lean into the input and take the information out and get those, knowledge bombs.
Yeah,
Yeah.
very good. Yeah, Damian, how about with you? It sounds like Michael teed you up there to talk a little bit about that saying.
Yeah. So what occurred to me was the notion of, I think it can be so valuable as a leader to understand what individuals' talents and strengths are, and that's becoming more frequent now. But in my early roles as a leader, I didn't know. Of course, people left clues, but I didn't even know how to interpret those clues. But what came to mind as Michael was talking about that was being aware of someone that has the input tendencies or has that as a dominant strength, to utilize that, to call on them to do that, because it's what they want to do, it's what they're good at doing, and then put some guardrails around it. Instead of saying, go research this, say something like, go bring me 5 examples of this, so they know what the end point is. But harness that tendency that they have to want to do that and take advantage of that.
That's really great. Give them some parameters to work around so that they're not stuck in that cycle.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
wonderful.
Deadline. Give them a deadline. They need a deadline.
Yeah.
Because if they've got maximizer like me and input, they're going to be like, 5. Oh, well, I've got 5, but maybe I could get another better 5 the next time to give me
Right.
more time. You've
Okay.
got to watch it. It's
Yeah.
going to be a real blind spot.
And
Mhm.
Damian, you started to sort of head over into the positive side. I'm just wondering if, just to reintroduce the question, or if you have thoughts about, additional places where it can go, have a maybe not disastrous, but a negative impact on a team. Whether it's a team leader running around with it, or a team member that's, maybe doesn't have the positional power, but is bringing their input to a team meeting and trying to contribute. but is not doing it in an effective way, or having a negative impact on that team interaction. Are there other highlights that you'd want some of our leader listeners to think about when if they've got input themes of their own, or leading somebody with?
No, I think Michael, brought up two that occur to me, particularly in reflecting on previous leadership roles I've had, which were the tendency to want to be right.
Yeah.
And the tendency to want more input. I want more input. And the team, somebody else realizes we actually have enough. We don't need more. So now let's execute on that.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just want to make sure that we got your thoughts around that, if you had anything to add.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So now let's talk about those positive ways. And Damian, you teed us up really well for this to really talk about understanding those tendencies and then being able to set some parameters. So, but what are some ways that this would positively impact a team, like on a team leader's perspective as well as a team member? What are ways that their best contributions?
So for me, what stands out the most is the one I mentioned, which is, lean into somebody that's got high input on the team. And I think I found myself at times when I was a team leader, oftentimes those high in executing wanted to get stuff done so quickly, somebody that's high in achiever, where I was kind of tapping the brakes saying, well, let's get a little bit more information before we make the final decision. Yes, we can make it soon, but let's collect more data before we make that decision.
I'm hearing a due diligence sort of aspect to that. Is that the direction you're kind of going here? That might be my deliberative talking, but I'm just thinking about having a sufficient data set or sufficient knowledge around a particular topic. Is that what you're kind of getting at here?
Actually, I wasn't, but now that I think about it, that I have done that as well, is make sure there's sufficient data set. What I was thinking about was more options.
Okay.
When I was working with a team and we were serving a student population, and they'd say, okay, we've got this thing, let's launch it. I would say, well, let's launch options. What else can we do at the same time?
Oh,
if we're
got it.
Do
Okay.
this thing, let's collect more things that we can do. Let's get more, alumni that they can talk to. That we don't, rather than 4, let's get 14.
Okay.
But on the decision-making side, I think the due diligence is certainly is something that a leader can bring, or even somebody that doesn't have the positional authority, but is going to be implementing, can say, hey, what if we did such and such?
I'm really glad you separated those two things out, because that definitely does show the difference between my deliberative tint on it of being cautious or doing the due diligence, but you were thinking more, and now what I'm hearing is very much an options based. Oh, we've got four alumni that could contribute. What if we go get 14, so that there are even more options, or we've got one event, we can do 4 more like it. So I very much thank you very much for calling me out and broadening my perspective a little bit around that. Michael, you've been sort of giggling at both of us this whole time, so I'm curious what you have to say around.
I just think, Chad, I giggle all the time. I'm always laughing because I'm always, this just resonates so much with me, and I wish the whole world talked in the language of this beautiful language that we have available to us to discover ourselves and how we can work better with others and lead a happier life. But while Damien was talking, I was like, what I'm hearing is that natural curiosity and that craving as a team leader to just want a little bit more. The need to, what is it? I'd say just the need to be, where's the opportunity here for us to learn something else? So it's not necessarily, for me, like when you think of learner, it's the process of learning.
Right.
When you think of input, it's I help people by sharing information that I have gathered. So there's
Yeah.
there's that difference. And then if someone has that ability and opportunity as a team leader to just ask that powerful question of what's possible or what else, that can bring us to places we never even imagined in a team.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think it really opens it up. And plus, it's really helping to fulfill the need for inputs to get more information.
Yeah. It's interesting to hear you say that, because now what I'm hearing is that the significant difference between, say, learner, which is a little bit more process or directional, whereas input, it's breadth and depth. And I know that we've talked about varying levels of depth. Sometimes it's Blinkist, you need the 2-line summary of a book, but then, Damian, you've talked about going out and getting, multiple resources on one particular topic and bringing that depth and the rabbit hole. So I really appreciate you highlighting that difference there, Michael, because I come with a learner lens, and just to hear the contrast with input and the contributions they can make is so drastically different.
Can I ask you a question on the basis of the lens of learner, just really
Yeah.
quickly? And it's more so I'm going to say a statement and then ask you to consider it, okay?
Yeah.
In my experience, and because I've got learner too, I
Yeah.
feel learner is very inward focused on what it's bringing me, although it's strategic thinking. Okay, so that's my experience. This is
Yeah.
just me saying this. And then, while as with input, it's the gathering of information in service of, again, this in service of others. So I'm
Yeah.
saying it on that basis, and I'm asking the question to any of the learners out there, but I'm asking it to you specifically, Chad.
Yeah.
Do you find that the process of learning is for you or for others?
So as I'm thinking about that, I was going to originally answer it's a little bit of both. But as I think about the second sort of branch of that, it still does come back around to me a little bit. So one of the things I've talked about, and I think Damian and I even explored this a little bit in our learner episode, is that for me, I can actually utilize my learner talents to be outward focusing because I want to learn about others. I almost transition it into a relationship building domain theme.
Okay.
So it kind of bleeds in that direction. But I've also used learner to pick up, how to relearn Microsoft Access because I needed to develop my own database, because what the college, at the time, the work I was doing for the college I used to work for didn't do what we needed to do. So I needed to create a whole new tool. Well, that meant that I needed to go out and learn both for myself, but also to implement something for the larger organization. So oftentimes when I've gone and learned things, it has been in service of others. I just in general have a service-oriented mindset. So that comes into this a little bit. But also because of my harmony themes that come into that, I've got a very practical edge to the things I go and learn. It does tend to be much more near term, which is a tendency of those with learners, with learner talents. I don't know if for you, but at least for me, it's a very almost immediate or very near term what's coming up right around the bend. But it is a little bit of both. It is in service of me, but usually I'm trying to utilize that knowledge in my experience to then go and, okay, then how do I distribute this? How do I bring this to a larger group of people? That's probably a little bit of my responsibility showing up too. So,
and thank you for answering, because it's reminded me of the movie Hidden Figures. And I can't remember the character's name, but she went and learned all about the IBM computer and how it needed to be ran.
Yes.
And it was in service of her knowing, but also in service of all of the team that they would have been made redundant or had lost their jobs. So she then went and trained them up, and then they all got to be involved in this historical process in NASA. So
Mhm.
you're
And-
my hidden figure guy
So
now,
good.
Chad. Well done.
and for your inputs minded, it was Dorothy Vaughan was
That's her. Thank
the
you,
was the
Dorothy
was
Vaughan.
the one of the three. So you've got Katherine Johnson, who really did a lot of the work around the launch and the circumventing of the Earth, and then Dorothy Vaughan was the IBM person, and then I can't remember
Mary,
the
Mary, it
engineer
was
one.
the engineer one, Mary, the
Yeah.
engineer one. See,
Yeah,
I'm like, I
yeah,
know
it's
it.
right
It's
there. It's right there. So
Brilliant. Thank you for sharing that
yeah, yeah,
with
and
me.
yeah. So I would, we could spend another hour or so probably comparing and contrasting learner and input and a bunch of the others. But I would like to sort of return to the focus on input. And as we, start to think about wrapping up the show, I wanted to put out the question to both of you. If you had one or two golden nuggets, since that's been a theme in this show, that you want to share with people about input, whether it's a top line thought you had or an insight you gained from even having this conversation, you'd want us to really highlight to people, what would those be? And Damian, I'm gonna come to you first with maybe your one or two, if you want to make it three, because you've got input and you've got a lot of other things to list. But what are your key takeaways or things that people should know?
So I guess one of them is whether you're knowledgeable about strengths or not, deeply knowledgeable, or you just took it once and you filed the report away. This notion of, there are clues to talent. And so if you encounter somebody that you see they have collections, or you see they are a hoarder,
Collector or archivist, to use your words,
or an archivist, even better. That's a strong clue that they have input, and that can be a great. They can be a great resource to you potentially, depending on, because if it's showing up in that one way, chances are it shows up in other ways. So so that's a clue, if you don't have input, that someone else does, that can be a resource for you. The other thing that occurs to me in terms of, if you are high in input, so I will give two more, so that for a total of three. Is think about how you can fine tune that, convert that talent into a strength through ways of organizing these things that you collect more efficiently. And I need that as much as anybody else with input, constantly seeking to refine how I organize and can access those things. And then the last one, for people that are high in input, actually comes from the beginning of our call today before the recording came on. And that's, realize that not everyone has a tendency or a need to collect and archive things. And so as you're sharing your list or your resources, recognize that they may be good hearing just one or two. They don't need to hear three.
Very much appreciate that perspective.
Love it.
Yeah. Michael, over to you. What are your one or two takeaways that you want to drop on our listeners coming out of this conversation?
I think I'm going to kind of go opposites here. So input need to be given the opportunity to output. Otherwise, they're just going to keep taking the information in, and they like to be asked questions. So facilitate that growth. I really feel that there's a real, and plus it goes back to individualization, Jen. You truly see them. You give them the opportunity to do that. And also then when you think about it, it's using computer analogies, because we were talking about IBM. It's the downloading of information to then upload it somewhere, so it does something and it brings value.
Nice.
So yeah, so give them space to grow, learn, but watch them so that they can, anyone with input, just watch
Yeah.
yourself.
Love it. Absolutely love it.
Indeed.
Thank you so much, both of you. We are going to wrap up the show, and I'm going to be the first. And I know Jen wants to say her 2 cents on this, but I really want to thank you for educating me on the input theme. This has been really informative and really insightful. This has given me a little bit more a learner and input on this theme. So I do want to extend my thank you. Jen, was there anything you wanted to add to the end of this other than our mutual thanks?
Yeah, with input at 19 for me, I believe is where it falls. So it's not in my supporting strengths either. It's been wonderful to sit and listen and learn from the two of you, laugh about some of these tendencies that you have, and that you've been so open and honest and just sharing with us and our listeners. We're so very thankful to have you here and part of our show. Thank you. So with our thanks extended, I'm just going to ask anybody that has made it this far and has listened to this wonderful conversation with Damian and Michael, that if you've enjoyed this, leave us a review. If you're watching this on or listening to this on our podcast, if you're catching this on LinkedIn or YouTube, feel free to add to the conversation. We'd love to hear your comments, your thoughts. If you have this theme high, you work with somebody that has this theme as one of their dominant talent themes, let us know what you'd add to this conversation. And, we'd like to keep having this conversation and keep deepening it, especially for those of us, for those out there with input, to keep inputting on input. But with that said, I'm going to again say thank you, and we're going to end our show. And we encourage you to come back and listen to other future coaches. They're going to be talking about the other CliftonStrengths themes and some other topics like leadership, followership, and employee engagement in the future. So with that, I'm Chad Ahern from Talent Teams Consulting. And I'm Jen Werner from Jen Werner Coaching. And we thank you for listening. Have a great day.